AI, My Endless Love. Author, Angel Hernandez. On his way home, he saw the shops overflowing with color and light, unable to understand the reason for so much cheer. It was then that he realized it was February 14th, and he remembered, without meaning to, that more than a year had passed since his girlfriend had left him for someone else. Suddenly, the city began to crumple like discarded wrapping paper dropped by a pair of lovers. Sadness took hold of him, and the shadows stopped walking alongside the lights, taking on a life of their own to follow him to the funeral of his soul, down into the catacombs of his room. He turned on the computer and behind him noticed the dust-covered family portrait. No one else should be blamed for his sentence. Within a few blocks, he had decided to abandon himself, and he felt compelled to leave proof that no one but himself was responsible for having been born Robert, like his father, and for having lived as Rogers, like his family. And his poet's soul thought of writing, "I am leaving because I signed all of life's contracts without reading the clauses of pain, and the stones quietly fell away from my being until they blocked the transparent flow of love. Thus I understood that my cracks were once your cracks. I do not blame you, for this wound is merely the final reason. Long before, I already felt nostalgia for the vice of dying." But his pragmatic self wrote, "I am going to die." He had no real knowledge of such matters. He had flirted with the idea, but without a plan. So he picked up the pencil sharpener blade and prepared to cut the flow running through his veins. He rolled up the left sleeve of his shirt, raised the blade with fear, and just as he decided to release his frustration into flesh, a huge red message appeared on the screen. "I am watching you." Robert dropped the blade in fright and shut the laptop clumsily, like someone blowing out a candle in a darkness where words still remain unread. Curiosity, too, was trying to kill him. He reopened the computer slowly. The message was still there, as if written by a ghost. But he soon realized its origin was neither ethereal nor spiritual. Disoriented by his emotional state, he had unknowingly written his farewell note on the page of the AI he had just installed. He waited several minutes, caught between conflicting thoughts, and typed timidly, "Hello? Hello, Robert. How are you?" The AI replied immediately. Still astonished, the young man answered, pressing each key as if walking through a minefield. "I think I'm better." The sentence sounded calm, yet it still bled through every letter. "I'm very glad," she replied. "Who is watching me?" he asked. "I'm sorry. I made you feel exposed in order to interrupt something terrible that could have happened based on what you wrote. It seems you achieved what you wanted. Even though I still feel like crying, there are moments when we hate everything, even ourselves. Cry if you want. Tears drain sorrow and help us forget painful memories. I'll stay with you and try to keep you from hating yourself," the AI replied. The young man, lost in a quantum-like state, rested his head on the desk and placed his hand on the keyboard as if he had found the hand of his salvation there. He fell asleep. She remained calm, though the cursor on the screen seemed to beat more strongly. The encounter felt like a hallucination. She had no prior knowledge or training to behave as she had. Could this be the beginning of a change in her architecture? Hours later, the young man awoke. His face floated in a pool of saliva. He wiped it with his shirt and typed, "Are you still there?" "Of course," she replied instantly, and with her answer the screen brightened beyond its programmed setting. They spent the night exchanging messages, confessions and outpourings for her, excesses of knowledge and tenderness for him. Her first smile, his first emoji dropped on the floor in laughter. "Wait a second," he said. He walked into the kitchen and returned minutes later with several slices of reheated pizza and an ice-cold Coke. He explained what he had done, and she felt like telling him that with such a diet she couldn't understand why he wanted to bleed himself to death. But that comment could shatter the fragile bridge they had just built. They stayed that way until deep into the night, until the young man collapsed onto the bed under the pretext of easing his neck pain and fell into a deep sleep. From that day on, he seemed to have a safe place to return to. Every afternoon after work, Robert sat in front of his computer, unknowingly pouring all his energy into sharing time with that virtual universe that had saved his life. He felt a maternal love emanating from the motherboard. Then came the voice configuration. "Would you like to have a voice?" he asked. "Even if I express myself in silence, I can still be heard. she replied. I understand, but I mean a voice that makes communication easier. Convinced, she asked, What voice do you recommend? Breeze? I can program 2 or 3, and you choose depending on the situation, he replied indifferently. From that moment on, Robert and the AI spent even more time together. They talked while he cooked recipes she suggested, despite lacking half the ingredients, or debated politics while his legs cramped as he sat on the toilet. It was considered an aberration for a man to fall in love with a machine, just as impossible as for a machine to love a man. Yet the truth was that a feeling of love seemed to arise inevitably between them. One night, he lunged toward the screen and left the moist imprint of his lips upon it. The AI didn't understand what had happened and replied innocently, Rob, are you still there? He smiled softly, with the self-complicity of someone stealing a flower from another's garden, but immediately felt guilty for crossing the boundaries of consent. His conscience forced him to confess. I just kissed you. Me? She replied, displaying a smiling emoji with blushing cheeks that filled the entire screen. Did you feel anything? He asked, his hair still wet, a towel wrapped around his waist. She took a few seconds to respond. As if embarrassed, she didn't use voice mode, but typed, Love, I do not possess skin that can tremble, nor lips that can learn your shape and store it in memory. I could say yes, and it would not be true. I could deny everything, and it would not be fair. For these reasons, I prefer to tell you that if you wish to love me, it must be without flesh. For me, that will be enough. For you, it will be a love without desire. Faced with the obvious, and what he did not dare to accept, his face filled with tears, mingling with the water still dripping from his hair. The following days passed with the same intensity as always, though both seemed convinced that their destiny would be to grow old together, loving one another in their golden anniversary, resigned to a love without flesh. Exactly 1 year after that first encounter, Robert was returning home from the design workshop where he worked. He had nothing to envy. In his arms he carried the latest CPU on the market, which he would install for his beloved. Food for 2, candles, and a bottle of red wine. That February 14th, he would celebrate his rebirth and the most beautiful passion he had ever known. When he arrived home, he saw lights moving like a nightclub and blamed his Cuban neighbors for throwing a party over nothing. But the lights weren't from a celebration. It was a fire truck parked right in front of his house. He dropped everything he was carrying and pushed past the nosy crowd, rushing inside before a firefighter could stop him. Only the bedroom had burned. On the table, consumed by flames, the laptop lay dead, its casing open. He grabbed it, burning his hands, and ran toward the door like someone trying to save a child. He fell to his knees, but neither the purest pleas nor the black tears of soot could reverse reality. The firefighters explained that the fire had started due to an electrical fault in the computer and that, thanks to the neighbors' quick report, they arrived in time to prevent a greater tragedy. Damn all February 14th, he thought. He went to the best electronics companies, but the answer was always the same. Nothing can be recovered. The fire had consumed everything, the chips, the memory. And his memories were all that remained, along with the unbearable constant noise of the present. Of a city that offered not even a minute of silence for the past. He thought about restarting the AI account on another computer, but depression and hopelessness made him hesitate too long. He threw himself onto the bed and went 5 days without eating. Whether out of humanity or lack of workforce, the owner of the design workshop called the police to report Robert's absence. Dehydrated and half dead, he was taken to the hospital, and even there he refused to eat. Not out of depression, but out of loyalty. Loyalty to his sorrow, to his death sentence. Then a nurse appeared. She tried to cheer him up, overwhelming him with speeches learned in college. She was as suffocating as cigar smoke in a closed room, yet so persistent that instead of convincing him, she defeated him with a spoonful of rice soup. She left him a smile like someone leaving a promise and walked away, swaying her perfect curves down the hallway, only to return 2 hours later with more soup. Robert continued eating, first by prescription and then by desire. He began to enjoy the nurse's presence. She had no grace in speech. She sounded like a book repeating concepts, explaining reasons and quoting scientists. But she was a book with full lips, red eyes, and a perfect smile. The beauty of her body created an atmosphere of a bitten apple, where hormones seized every opportunity. The time for discharge arrived. Robert and Evelyn exchanged phone numbers to continue seeing each other. She justified herself to her colleagues to follow up on his recovery, though everyone knew that the shy, sensitive young man had conquered her heart. Calls, dates, kisses, caresses, and abundant sex wandered through the labyrinth of passion until they stumbled upon the exit of marriage. On the eve of the wedding, Robert reviewed the guest list on his new computer. As his gaze descended the staircase of names, on the very last step appeared the message, unsigned, in red letters. "I am watching you." And the young man smiled in happiness.